Okay, so my name is Paola Garibay, and I am the Project Manager of Economic Development with the Berwyn Development Corporation. I am going to start us off with some information on the Cook County Small Business Source. If you are joining us today, you may have been an applicant of the Cook County Small Business Source. Maybe you've connected with one of the business support organizations in the past, received a newsletter. Thank you for being here. So an overview of the Cook County Small Business Source. This is a program that is dynamically designed to provide businesses with the support that they need in all areas of expertise, including marketing, business capital, finances, management, real estate, operations, really anything that you can think of related to business. We have a partner or an expert in the network that is readily available to provide support to your small business at no cost. So this program was designed as a result of the pandemic, trying to help business owners recover from that. But we did find that, continued support is needed. Many businesses still through the pandemic are continuing to suffer to stay afloat or wanting to improve their operations, and many new businesses who have come onto the market since the pandemic. So this program is ongoing. There is funding available to provide not only grant dollars, such as those who may have received back to business grants in the past, or any PPP financing applied to receive Source Grow grant. In addition to grant dollars, we also provide, as I mentioned, free business advising. So this can be in a form of a one-on-one conversation, consultation with an expert, whether it be somebody here on our team at the BDC or another one of the referral partners in the area. If we don't have the expertise in our office, we do send you to the nearest person who can support you. Group advising sessions like the one we are hosting today with this webinar is another option, really just providing educational resources, collaborating with our community partners to bring these expertise resources to the businesses. Through the Cook County Small Business Source, we have a network of over 30 partners who are readily available across Cook County to support your business. And in addition to the one-on-one advising, group advising, and educational webinars, we do also host events, which is a great opportunity to network not only with fellow business owners, but also with partners of the Cook County Small Business Source and representatives from Cook County and the state of Illinois as well. So a little bit more about the source and the impact we've been able to make. Since its inception, we have been able to help over 10,000 businesses in Cook County. 63% of those businesses have been owned by people of color. Relating to the grants and how much money has been administered, it's been over $17 million of grants distributed to businesses with 20 employees or less, with 53% of those employees and business owners being owned by women. A total of over 3,800 businesses have received direct assistance through business advising, with a one-on-one consultation with an expert or group advising session, and 78% of those have been micro businesses, which means that they have actually less than 10 employees. On the screen, you may see some logos that you recognize. This is who is a partner with the Cook County Small Business Source. The BDC is one of them, but you may recognize some other big names on here as well. These are all, again, partners who are readily available to provide support to your business. And then before we pass it back to Noeli, I did just want to touch on the Source Grow grant. If you applied for the grant, the deadline was the last day of October 31st, 2022. So since then, the grant review period has started and is ongoing. The grant reviewers will be reaching out directly to you by the email that you provided with your grant application. You can expect to hear back in early 2023 with a response regarding whether or not you're eligible to receive the funding and what next steps are. One thing that we do want to make sure is that your business is in good standing with the state. So if you do not know, this is a great opportunity to go to this website, visit the link, enter your business name, and see if there's any outstanding charges or at any type of status there that needs to be corrected. You will have an opportunity to change this if you are eligible for the grants. The reviewers will tell you, hey, you are eligible, but you still need to get in good standing. But we highly, highly advise that you take, action now, get ahead of it to make the process as smooth as possible and hopefully get you that money. So we'll share the slide deck at the end of this presentation with the link on how you can verify your standing. And then lastly, just some netiquette here before we get started. As I mentioned, this is being recorded, so please keep your cameras off if you're not comfortable. Please keep yourselves muted so we can reserve the audio for our presenter. If you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat as we go. We will try to reserve some time at the end of this presentation for a Q&A. And if you happen to lose connection, just log back in. Somebody here on our team will monitor the waiting room, make sure you don't miss anything. And with that, I will pass it back to Noeli. I'm going to stop sharing my screen here so you can take over.
Perfect. Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Wonderful. So good morning and thank you, Paola, the BDC team for having me here today. And before we dive in, I do want to set expectations that there's so much information I can share with you on this topic of incorporation. Easily could be a full week seminar. So I'm going to do my best in the time we have today to talk a little bit more about the points that I think all business owners and entrepreneurs should consider with respect to incorporation. And if you do already have your legal entity in place, how you maintain that. And just like Paola was mentioning, there are things that happen when you're not treating your entity the way you legally should, that puts that entity out of good standing. So it's always important to understand what your ongoing obligations are as well. And quick caveat, you'll see in the presentation a couple of points where I solicit some feedback or Q&A. We're going to skip through some of those slides for the interest of time today. So you'll see me just kind of gloss over those. But without further ado, let's continue on. So a brief introduction of myself. My name is Noeli Serna. I've been practicing corporate law for almost 7 years now. My corporate law firm, Serna Legal Services, works primarily with Latino-owned businesses and entrepreneurs. I'm licensed in Illinois and Wisconsin, and we're here to provide businesses with legal services, which includes incorporation services, contract services, and we help protect businesses' intellectual property as well. As a good lawyer, I do have my own disclaimer for the presentation that this presentation should not be construed as legal advice. It's intended and designed to help people understand an area of law. In this case, we're going to talk about the process of incorporating a business. And the information I'm sharing should not be a substitute for professional legal advice. Obviously, it does not create an attorney-client relationship as well. All right, so let's dive in. Before I begin to explain what the different options of legal entities are, how you create that legal entity for your business, I think it's important to understand at a higher level, what does it mean to actually incorporate a business? So if someone asks you if your business is incorporated or if you want to incorporate it, what they're usually asking you is whether you, as the owner of the business, are running the business as a sole proprietor, or if you've created a legal entity for the business. Examples of legal entities, of course, are LLCs, C corporations, S corporations, partnerships, and there are many others in the state of Illinois. Now, in order to incorporate your business and create that legal entity in Illinois, you will have to submit certain documents to the Illinois Secretary of State in order to formally register that entity. And then once you have incorporated it, there are going to be certain legal and tax requirements that you have to maintain on an ongoing basis to make sure that that entity is in good standing. All right. So now one of the more common questions that I do receive is whether incorporating your business, in other words, creating that legal entity, is required. So the short answer is that no, incorporation is not legally required. You can choose to instead continue to operate as a sole proprietor, which you become a sole proprietor automatically under the eyes of the law, in the eyes of the IRS, the moment you begin to sell a product or service to a consumer. And there are certain pros and cons of remaining a sole proprietor. So I'm going to touch on those briefly here, and we're going to start with the cons. So when you are a sole proprietor, and I think this is the biggest and most important point that I would love for you to walk away with today, is that you, as the business owner in a sole proprietorship, are the one that is solely responsible for all contracts, debts, liabilities, etc. of your business. So what it means to be a sole proprietor is that, in essence, you as the business owner are the business, right? And what that does is it creates certain risks for the business owner, because if, for example, someone sues the business, in essence, the person that they're suing when they're suing a sole proprietorship is you, the business owner, right? So now you are going to be the one that's liable for that lawsuit. And while, of course, you're going to have business insurance, and every business owner should, that will, theoretically cover some of that cost of the lawsuit if it has to be paid out. If the insurance doesn't cover the full suit, you individually are going to be responsible for, finish paying that lawsuit. And that could mean that they could go after your own personal assets, your home, your car, your savings, in order to cover that debt. For tax purposes too, a sole proprietorship is what's called a pass-through entity. That means that the money that you're earning in the business is going to pass through the business, and it's going to land on your individual tax return. As a self-employed sole proprietor, you may have to pay taxes that are going to be perhaps a little bit higher than if you were paying taxes on a legal entity. But of course, there are certain advantages of remaining a sole proprietor and not creating that legal entity. Some of the more common ones are that the registration costs of a sole proprietor are slightly lower than if you have an LLC or a corporation. For example, if you're a sole proprietor, you may have to register your business name with Cook County. I think right now in Cook County, it's about $50. You only renew that every 5 years. If you're creating an LLC in Illinois, that cost is going to be $150, and you're going to have to renew that every year for about $75 per year. So yes, the cost of having that LLC is slightly higher, but I don't think it's a significantly higher cost than compared to being a sole proprietor. As a sole proprietor, there are also fewer annual requirements that you're going to have to comply with, whereas legal entities, on the other hand, may have more requirements that they're going to have to comply with on a yearly basis. And I'll talk about those in more detail when we talk about the different legal entities. So in short, no, it is not mandatory to incorporate your business, but there are certainly benefits and fewer risks for you as the business owner if you decide to do so. All right. So I've explained the pros and cons of remaining a sole proprietor, which again means not creating a legal entity. But I do want to explain certain of the benefits of creating an LLC, a corporation, a legal entity for your business. The first, and the one that I mentioned earlier, when you incorporate your business, you are doing what's called limiting your personal liability. So that means that when you create a legal entity for your business, the business itself and the legal entity is now going to be separate and apart from you, the business owner. So theoretically, your personal assets as the business owner, those are going to be completely separate and apart from those of your business. So that means that the debts and liabilities of your business are also going to be separate from you individually. So that means that there is essentially a barrier or a wall between you and your business, where in the example I used earlier about a lawsuit, for example, if someone is suing your business and you have an LLC, what they really are suing is the LLC, and they're generally only going to be able to collect on the assets of that LLC, and they're not going to be able to reach into your personal assets to collect on that lawsuit. And of course, there are exceptions to everything, but that is generally the rule. And that is why most people opt and should, in my opinion, form that legal entity for their business. But there are other benefits. One of the biggest ones too is fundraising efforts. If you're looking for investors in your business, they are going to want to see a legal entity in place for your business that's separating and protecting the assets of the business from those of the business owner. There are tax benefits. And I think this is a good point to emphasize that when you're assessing the legal entity that you want to choose for your business, make sure that you're also consulting with an accountant, because different legal entities are going to be taxed in different ways. So you want to make sure to put together and incorporate based on the way that is going to create most tax savings for you as the business owner. And finally, becoming an LLC, being incorporated, it does establish a sense of credibility for your business. You can establish your business's own credit rating. You're going to be able to open bank accounts specifically for the business, it's just establishing a future where if, for example, you want to sell your business in the future, you'll be able to do that more easily, and you'll be able to attract the best buyer in that situation that can see that you have been separating what is yours personally from that of your business. All right. So I do always stop here before we start talking about the different types of legal entities, which we'll dive into in a slide or two, and talk a little bit about what it is to choose the name of your business and how important this step is. It sounds very, straightforward, right? I choose the name of my business. I make sure it's available in the state. I'm ready to go. But I think whether or not you incorporate your business, some business owners don't understand sometimes the implications of choosing the name of your business and doing the full research necessary to make sure that your business name is going to be completely available and protected. So the business name that you choose, it's critical, right? Because it's going to be one of your business's biggest assets. It's going to be what your customers, what the public will search for online. It is what's going to set you apart from other businesses. So whether you already have a business and you have a business name that's active and that you've chosen, or maybe you're in the steps of planning for your business and you're trying to choose a name, either point, right? It's good to stop and research your business name to decide if there are any risks associated with it. So first place, of course, is running a Google search, looking if any other businesses in the area have your name. You should search the state and county websites of where your business is located to see if any other businesses have filed that same name that you would like for your business. And then one final point that I think many business owners neglect to do is to search the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office. So why do that? We do that because if a similar business to yours in a completely different state has filed a federal trademark for the name that you are using or want to use for your business, that business and that business owner, they have the right to use that name exclusively for the kind of business that they have. So if you have a restaurant in Illinois, you name it, let's just whatever name, right? Andy's. And then there is a business, a restaurant in California that's called Andy's as well. They filed a trademark for that name. If they see that you are using their business's name in Illinois, they can ask you to stop using that name because they have federal rights over that use of that name for a restaurant business. So, the odds of them actually telling you to stop may be low, but depending on the name that you've chosen, could be higher, right? Because maybe you have such a specific name that there's confusion in the market. If somebody Googles your business name, they pop up, you pop up. The person that has the federal trademark has the right to tell the other business to stop using the name. And that's, I go into so much detail about this because it's so important sometimes to keep that in mind, because if you've been operating your business for years under a certain name and all of a sudden someone tells you you have to stop doing so, well, that would of course cause just major interruption to your business. You may have to rebrand, remarket yourself, and that is time and money lost. So I always make that side note and this caveat about doing the research on your business's name, making sure that you also as a business owner, if you have a name that you think is so special and that you want to maintain for many years, is considering filing that trademark for your own business name. All right, I know that is a long-winded explanation about business names, but again, I think it's important to bring that to your attention as well. All right. So now let's dive into the topic at hand, which is the legal entity options. So I'm going to talk today about the three most common entities, which are the C corporation, S corporation, and a limited liability company. But keep in mind, that there are other options. The state of Illinois has certain requirements for certain businesses, sometimes that have to have a certain type of legal entity. A great example is a beauty salon, for example, or certain service providers are required to have a professional limited liability company. So making sure that you do the research ahead of time to understand if there are any obligations to have a certain type of legal entity based on the kind of business that you will be creating. But let's start with the more common ones. So first, let's talk about the C corporation. C corporations are what you would recognize as businesses that are on the stock exchange, right? The owners of a C corporation are called shareholders. They're going to invest money in the corporation, and in exchange for that money, they're going to get shares in the corporation. A C corp has a board of directors. It has officers like the CEO, secretary, treasurer. And the biggest thing, though, about C corporations that most business owners should keep in mind is that a C corporation has something called double taxation, right? So that means that the C corporation itself, the legal entity, is going to be taxed at the corporate tax rate, but the shareholders or the owners of that C corporation, they are also going to be taxed on any dividends, any gains, any money that they receive from the C corporation. So that double taxation is generally why smaller business owners especially try to avoid a C corporation. And there are other options where that double taxation does not happen. And an example of that then is the S corporation. So S corporations are a simpler version of a C corporation, and they have certain benefits. The S corporation also has shareholders. It also has a board of directors. It has officers. But the interesting thing about the S corporation is that when you create it, you're also going to apply for something called the subchapter S election with the IRS. What does that do? That gets you special tax treatment from the IRS, which primarily the idea behind it is to avoid the double taxation of the C corporation, right? Because S corporations, they're going to be taxed similar to LLCs as pass-through entities. What that means is that the corporation, the S corporation itself, it will not be taxed. Only you as the owner are going to be taxed on the business income, right? On the business and the income that the business has earned. And it may be at a slightly lower tax rate. But in order to get that S Corp special tax treatment, there are some requirements. We've put a couple, I believe here, right, that you have to have 100 or less shareholders, which for smaller businesses, that usually is not a problem. And the second, and I think one of the more important points of S Corp requirements is that the shareholders generally must be US citizens or US permanent residents. There are a couple of other requirements, but I think these are the most important to mention. And something that I didn't mention during the C Corp description and explanation that I want to mention now is that both C corporations and S corporations are going to have certain yearly requirements that they have to comply with in order to comply with law in Illinois. So some of those requirements are that both C and S corporations have to have an annual meeting of their shareholders. If they have that meeting, they're going to have to take notes called minutes, and they may need to have some resolutions, which are written documents explaining the actions that the corporation took that year. There's some legal formalities. Those don't have to be submitted anywhere. The state isn't looking for those, but it's really important for corporations to maintain those annual records, because if something happens and suddenly, it could be for many reasons. Maybe you're applying for a grant for your business. Sometimes as part of the grant application, they're going to ask if you have a corporation to send all of your annual records, which includes the resolutions, the minutes, et cetera, that I just described. If you're not keeping those up to date, you may not be eligible for that grant. And also one of the biggest things, this is a legal concept. But if you aren't maintaining those annual obligations, that signals to someone, if, for example, there's a lawsuit, at some point, you haven't been maintaining your annual records, you've been intermingling your personal money with your business money, all those are signs to a court and a judge that you're not treating your corporation or your legal entity as something separate from you as the business owner. So the court or a judge could decide you're not treating this as a separate legal entity. You're not keeping up with your annual obligations. So you know what? We're going to say that your entity really, it doesn't really exist. You're really operating as a sole proprietor, which means that in this lawsuit, we're going to go after your personal assets, your personal money and savings to pay for this lawsuit. So that's called piercing the corporate veil, to be very technical about it, very legal. But it's super important, right? You never want to find yourself in a position where someone is questioning whether your legal entity is or isn't actually protecting you personally as the business owner. So I know I've said a lot there. Corporations are special. They have these extra requirements. Speak to an attorney if you have any questions about how you have been operating, if you have a corporation, to make sure that you're keeping it up to date, that you're complying with all the requirements of Illinois law. All right, all that being said about corporations, then we have LLCs. So if you are a business owner, an aspiring business owner, it is most likely that you have heard about LLCs, which is an abbreviation for a limited liability company, because truly they are one of the most widely used, most popular legal entity, especially for small to mid-sized businesses. And I'll explain a little bit about why that is the case, right? So a little bit of background on LLCs. The owners of an LLC are called members. They're the ones that are going to decide what actions and decisions are going to be taken for that business. And one of the biggest differences between an LLC and a corporation, it comes down to those annual requirements that I was just describing for a corporation. An LLC, it does not have the annual requirements to have a meeting. It doesn't need to have annual resolutions, no minutes annually, etc. So there are less things that you have to be keeping up with on a year-to-year basis compared to a corporation, which just makes it a little bit easier to manage, less that you have to worry about in terms of keeping up to date and keeping your LLC in good standing on a year-to-year basis. That's not to say you'll never have resolutions, you'll never have certain legal documents, because when you take major decisions for your business, like maybe you're entering into a loan, you're going to want to document that. And you do that through resolutions. That's what a resolution is. It's a document saying that the owners have agreed to take this action, and here it is in writing. We store it away in our records. And if there's ever a question about it, we bring that out and present that documentation. So that requirement doesn't go away, but there isn't this requirement to do it on a year-to-year basis like there is for a corporation. And then in terms of taxes, taxes are more flexible when it comes to LLCs. LLCs can be taxed in different ways. They can be taxed as pass-through entities, like we described for an S corporation, where the money, the income of the business passes through to the owner, so that the owner is the one that's reporting that income on their individual tax return. But then LLCs can also be taxed as S corporations. They can be taxed as partnerships, and they're just different ways to manipulate, not manipulate that, but to choose the tax option and the tax situation that will save your business the most money. And again, I'm going to mention here that to make the best decision from a tax perspective, I always recommend that business owners form a relationship with an accountant that has experience on corporate taxation. It may not be enough to hire an accountant that does personal tax returns on a year-to-year basis. You want to make sure that you're talking to somebody that has experience with businesses, the difference between LLCs, S corps, etc., so that they can assess the best entity for your business from a tax perspective. All right, it's a lot on those entities. And as a final quick bonus point here, it's very common for business owners to perhaps decide that they want to go into business with a partner. So when you do want to operate your business as a partnership, you will have many different options. You can use any of the legal entities that I just described here to create your partnership. It'll just need to be documented in the right way. But there are tax implications, again, for partnerships in which legal entity you choose. So I am not going to go into details here about how to legally structure that. But what I will emphasize here is just how important it is to put written documentation in place before you move forward with the partnership. I can't tell you how many times I have received phone calls at my firm about disputes or, a partner that's no longer happy in the partnership and they want to get out of the partnership, they want their money back, but they never put that partnership in writing, right? So now it becomes very, very difficult, much more onerous from a legal perspective to unwind that, right? So it'll cost you more money at the end of the day. So it doesn't matter if it's your best friend, your mom, your dad, sibling, spouse, it doesn't matter who you're going into partnership with. The biggest takeaway here is put that partnership in writing, okay? All right. So the next logical question, right? We've described a few different legal entities, different options for you and your business. And many business owners get all this information, but then they think, okay, but how do I choose, right? What is the best option for me and my business? And I'll talk through a couple of tips here. Is that one, before you start your business, before you choose that legal entity, put a written business plan in place, right? This process of putting a business plan together, it's that moment where you're going to be thinking about the intention for your business, right? Things like, how is my business going to be funded? Do I need investors? Am I, as the business owner, going to completely fund it and capitalize it? Is the idea that I want to create this business, make it grow really quickly, and then sell it quickly? Or do I want to be at the head of the business for a long, long time, right? All of those questions are ones that you're going to think through as you put a business plan in place. And those answers that you come up with, they're going to be important as you decide what legal entity is best for you. Another consideration are the owners, right? We talked about a situation where there's a partnership. Perhaps you're just going into business for yourself. Those are two very distinct scenarios, right? So you're going to want to understand, if you have partners, for example, is one of them a silent investor and the other one is in the business on a day-to-day basis? If that's the case, there are certain legal entities that will be more beneficial to you than others. You'll want to think about it from a tax perspective as well. So thinking through those details, thinking through the ownership structure, what the role of the owners will be in the business, all of that is very important as you decide what legal entity is best for you. And finally, don't hesitate in these cases when you're not sure, right, what legal entity is best. Invest in an attorney and an accountant that can help you think through the implications for your business, and they can help you determine the best legal structure for your specific business. Because again, no two businesses are identical. There are going to be different considerations. So always having the support around you to make the best decision, which will help you save money down the line, right? You want to start off on the right footing in order to make the best decision and earn the most money, save the most money on taxes as you move forward. All right, so now briefly, we talked about the different legal entities. We talked about what you need to analyze for yourself and your business as you make these decisions. So maybe now you're in a position where you've decided incorporation is the right step. You want to do this. You want to protect yourself as a business owner. So I'm ready to move forward. Perhaps I've chosen that I want to create an LLC. So what do I do next? Let's talk about some of the basic steps of what incorporating a business is. First, and we talked about this earlier, you will have to choose a name and you will perform the full research necessary to make sure that that name is available. Next, you will need to, in the state of Illinois, prepare and file certain formation documents. They have different names depending on the kind of legal entity you create. Sometimes they're called articles of incorporation, articles of organization. It just depends. And in that document, which is the document you will send to the state and that they will review, you're going to have to identify the name and address of the business. You'll have to identify the owners, perhaps the address of the owners as well. And no matter what legal entity you choose, you will have to decide who will be the registered agent of the business. And I'll give you a very, very quick explanation of what a registered agent is. But in Illinois, a registered agent is either a person that lives in Illinois that's 18 years or older, or it's a corporation or a business that's incorporated in Illinois. And that person or that business, they have to be available during business hours to receive legal documents on behalf of your business. Right, so you can be your own registered agent if you are a resident of Illinois, you're 18 years or older, and you are at a residence where there is somebody available during business hours to receive documents. Why is that important? It's important because, for example, a legal document that you could receive for your business is unfortunately a lawsuit or a demand letter, etc. If you do not answer certain legal documents within X days, there could be big penalties, ramifications to you if you didn't receive that document in time and didn't respond to it in time. So that's why it's so important to have a registered agent that will be available to receive those documents on behalf of your business. And different entities such as your accountant, some lawyers can act as your registered agent as well. It's just a matter of figuring out the best option for you and your business. So in terms of formation documents, aside from the articles of formation, which you have to send to the state and you have to pay your fee to the state as well, on top of that, and it's not required to send this anywhere, you don't have to file this anywhere, but you should create what's called an operating agreement for your legal entity. So for a corporation, those are called bylaws. I'm sure you've heard of those. For an LLC, it has different names, but it could just be an LLC operating agreement. So what that document does is that it's going to outline and describe how your business is going to be run. How do you add new owners to the business? How do you dissolve the business if you decide to end it in the future? If, knock on wood, the owner passes away, what happens to that business? Will it continue on and be passed along to family, or will it just cease to exist upon the owner's death? All of those questions are so important. And that's why the operating agreement is the place where you can describe that in more detail. Otherwise, if you don't have a written operating agreement, everything that's going to happen to your business, it'll default to whatever the Illinois law is. But the operating agreement is the place where you can make changes and you can make adjustments that may be slightly different than what the law itself dictates. So I always recommend that if you have a business, have an entity, if you don't have an operating agreement, put one in place, work with an attorney to get that done, because there are certain requirements under law that do have to be included. You just want to make sure that you have the most protective and most clear document for your business possible. All right, a lot on formation documents there. So an EIN, as many of you I'm sure are aware, it's like the social security number for your business. So once the Illinois Secretary of State approves your legal entity, they sign off on it. They tell you, congratulations, here is your LLC, corporation, etc. It's at that point where you can take the next step and apply for an EIN number. And you do this by submitting a document to the IRS. Your business will need that EIN number in order to report taxes, and you're going to need the business EIN number to open business bank accounts as well. And finally, licenses and permits, right? Every business is going to require some kind of a business license, business permit, different certifications that are going to be required. And this is all going to depend on the kind of business you're doing, so the kinds of products or services that you sell. And it's also very highly dependent on where your business is located, right? Unfortunately, every city, county, even towns and townships, they all have slightly different requirements for what business licenses are required in order to do business in that particular location. So that is a great place where you have to do your research, understand what's going to be required based on where your business is located as well. All right. I know a lot of information there, but you're not alone in this, right? I think that's one of the more important takeaways here. When you're going through this process, when you are ready to make this decision and take this step for your business, there are professional service providers that can help you through this, right? An attorney, of course, it's one place to start. We will help you evaluate the legal entity that best fits with your business and your goals for your business. We'll prepare the documentation and file everything that's necessary so that you're sure that you're starting your business and creating your legal entity based on law, and that you don't have to make costly corrections down the line for not starting in the proper way. I've talked about this as well. Your accountant, so important because you want to make sure you understand the benefits or disadvantages of forming a legal entity from a tax perspective, right? Business at the end of the day, it's money, right? You want to make money and you want to do it in a way that's legally protective so that you're not losing money down the line from a lawsuit or something bad that could happen. And taxes, right, are a huge part of money here, especially in the US. So you want to make sure to structure your business in a way that's protective and that provides you with those tax savings in the future. So at the end of the day, having these relationships with the lawyer, with an accountant for your business, it's important not just for the incorporation process, but it's so important as you grow and scale your business over time. As businesses grow, they're going to need contracts. Maybe you're renting a property. You want to make sure your lease agreement is protective. And those relationships you'll have with your lawyer and your accountant, they're just going to serve you very well as your business grows and even evolves and changes in the future. There are laws that are changing every day with respect to businesses. So you want to make sure that you have someone on your team, right, that is there to help you answer questions. They'll alert you to new changes in the law. And that way you're ready, right, to protect your business and to make sure it's prosperous over the years. All right, I'm glad to see we have some time because I do see a question, but I know that there's so much information that I've shared today. There's so many other topics that I could touch on with respect to incorporation, but here's my contact information. We do offer a free 15-minute discovery call. So if you have any questions, right, outside of what we're going to discuss today in the Q&A, or based on anything that I said, please don't hesitate to reach out. We're here to help. But I'm going to look quickly in the chat box because I see that, Mohammed, I see that you submitted a question. So you have a consulting engineering business, only employee, which is better, S corporation or LLC. So that it's a nuanced question because it has tax implications, right? So it depends. And I don't know, because if you haven't, I don't know what kind of legal entity you've created, or if you have not created a legal entity yet. But I know that there are certain benefits to having an S corporation from a tax perspective, because you may pay slightly less taxes when it comes to employees. But and I'm sorry to not really fully answer the question, but it depends on the taxes, right? So I think it's more a question for an accountant that can help you address that. But from a legal perspective, I think both options are fine. And it doesn't matter whether you're the only employee or not, because both options are going to allow you that protection, and it's going to limit your liability as the owner of the business. But at the end of the day, that may be a question for your accountant to determine the best tax solution as well. Sorry, I hope that semi answered your question. But any other questions that I can help address? You're welcome.
Thank you, Noeli. I do not see other questions in the chat. So I think unless you have any closing points, or if Mohammed, you had any other questions, we'll probably call it here.
Yeah, no other points other than, any questions that you do have. I think it's always important to vet them, to ask the question. Don't be afraid to use the amazing resources of organizations like the BDC that offer so many amazing free resources as well, because it's so much easier to do it right the first time than to decide, go on Google, try to figure it out yourself, then do it, figure out that maybe you didn't do it correctly. It'll be more costly to you to have to fix things rather than starting on the right foot. So always taking advantage of the resources around you. Yeah. Okay.
It's like Mohammed was dropping another comment in the chat. Mohammed, if you want to unmute yourself, you can also ask the questions. I'm going to actually stop the recording now in case there's any sensitive comments that I shared.
So I see, so